His hand was already bloody when he closed the chapel door. Dawn screamed. Not even the woman beside him, clutching her coat like it could still protect her. I stayed in the last pew, frozen, pretending I hadn't seen it. He looked at me once, just once, like he knew I wouldn't move. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the air reeked of iron and incense. I remember thinking, if he kneels after this, I'll lose my mind. He did that, and the moment his knees touched the stone floor, I knew I wasn't there to gather intelligence. I was there to confess, but I said nothing. Not yet, because something in that silence felt rehearsed, like the whole room had been waiting for me to speak first. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from. And what time it is. East Berlin, January 1960. The chapel sat behind a crumbling bakery. 3 guards passed it daily and never looked in. The first time I walked into that chapel, I thought it would smell like dust and guilt. But it didn't. It smelled like heat-burnt coal, old wax, and damp fabric left too long in winter air. I kept my head down, civilian coat 3 sizes too big, fake papers folded into real creases. The pews were uneven. The floor groaned. No one looked up when I entered. That was the first sign. This place wasn't what it seemed. In East Berlin, silence wasn't reverence. It was survival. The man at the front wasn't preaching. He wasn't even facing them. He was lighting a candle with both hands, careful, like the flame could hear him. Someone behind me coughed. Another whispered. A prayer in broken German. I didn't pray. I took a seat near the back, in the shadows. Observation post. Listening post. Confession booth in reverse. I wasn't here to believe. I was here to see. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. They called him Vader, but not with warmth, more like habit. He began speaking in low, slow cadence. Nothing rehearsed. Nothing recorded. His voice filled the room like steam, dense, quiet, persistent. Every line was more question than answer. I didn't write anything down. I just watched who nodded and who didn't. Their faces told me more than his sermon ever could. The service. I stayed behind. He approached me without a word, just a glance and a small nod, like we already knew each other. Maybe we did, maybe not. In this work, you learn to carry familiar faces like borrowed coats. He offered me tea. I declined. He smiled like he knew why. I haven't seen you before, he said finally. I'm not here to be seen, I replied. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just turned and walked toward the back room, leaving the door open behind him like an invitation or a test. I didn't follow. Not yet. I needed more time. The room emptied slowly. Some lingered to light candles. One woman touched the edge of the altar like it might heal something. I watched the last man leave a boy, really. Young, maybe 20, limped slightly on the left side. Scar on his jawline. Looked back at the pulpit before stepping out. I noted it. I noted everything. The chapel sat on the edge of an old tram depot. No guards, no patrol. But someone was always watching from across the street. Not police. Not Stasi. Worse, nobody. The kind of watcher who never writes things down because they don't need to. A week passed before I spoke to the pastor again. This time, he spoke first. You don't strike me as a man looking for God, he said. I'm not, I told him. But sometimes, you need to talk to someone who doesn't carry a gun. He nodded, slow and tired, like he'd heard that before. Or maybe said it himself once. That was the first crack in the role he played. A man of peace, with calluses like a mechanic, fingers too steady, eyes too still. I'd met men like that. Once in Bucharest, once in Naples. None of them had ever read the Bible twice. We spoke in metaphors, not scripture real ones, about light and winter and how silence can be louder than screams. He didn't ask where I came from. I didn't ask what side he was on. The game was older than both of us, but I started returning, not because I had orders, because something in him unnerved me in a way I hadn't felt since. Single quotes 5-8. By the third visit, I noticed the same 6 people always sat in the same pews. No one ever spoke to them. They never lit candles. And yet, every time I arrived, they were already there waiting. And the pastor? He never looked surprised to see me. I should have walked away then. But something about the way he moved, like he'd once marched instead of walked, kept me curious. That should have been the end of it. But then I found blood in the snow outside the chapel door. East Berlin, January 1960. Same chapel. Same cold. It was a Thursday evening when I finally stepped into the confessional. Not because I believed in it, but because he'd left the door open. Again, like always. And I was tired of circling the perimeter. I sat inside, closed the thin wooden door, and listened. The wall separating us was old and cracked. I could see his silhouette through the lattice. He didn't speak. Neither did I, not yet. There's a silence that comes right before betrayal. I've heard it before. This one had that texture. I haven't said my name out loud in years. I told him. He waited. Thomas, I said. Just Thomas. Still silence. Then a long breath followed. By a short verse. Psalms, I think. But it wasn't the scripture that caught me off guard. It was his tone. It wasn't comfort. It was recognition. You've been far from home, he said finally. I froze. I hadn't said anything else. Not my accent. Not my city. Just a name. A small one. A common one. Still, something in the way he said it felt too precise. You're not here for forgiveness, he added, softer now. You're here because you're tired of pretending. That almost made me speak again. But I didn't. I walked out without replying. The next day, he passed me a folded piece of paper as he lit a candle. No one noticed. No handoff, no eye contact. Inside, a line from Jeremiah, and 3 numbers I recognized as an access code. From a CIA drop point we thought had been compromised last year. No signature. No explanation. I burned the note, then spent the night wondering why he had it at all. That Sunday, I saw him in a new light. Not a shepherd, not even a defector. Something else. A man who'd once believed in something sharp. Maybe still did. But he carried it like a blade turned inward. During the sermon, his words shifted. Less scripture, more subtext. Phrases that didn't belong in a holy place. A name is a choice, he said. And every time we speak it aloud, we choose to. Remember or forget, the woman in the third pew started crying. He didn't stop. Later that evening, I waited by the chapel's rear entrance. He didn't seem surprised to find me there. You said I was tired of pretending, I told him. What about you? He smiled again. That same quiet smile, like something far behind his eyes had cracked long ago and never healed quite right. I used to be someone else, he said. Names don't last, but guilt does. Then he walked past me. No warning, no invitation. But he left the door to the back room open again. A week later, I spoke my full name inside the booth. First, middle, last. Just once, just to hear how it sounded in my own mouth. He responded with a single word. Finally. That was the moment I should have run. Because his reaction wasn't surprise. It was relief. By now, I had my place 4th row from the back, left side. 2 pews behind the man with the limp. 1 ahead of the woman who always carried gloves she never wore. I didn't know their names. That was safer. But I knew who looked at whom, who lingered after, who cried too easily, and who didn't flinch even when the pastor spoke of hell. The cover story was working. I was Elias, a disillusioned veteran looking for some kind of peace. They bought it. Or maybe they needed to believe it more than I needed to sell it. The pastor never called me by name, again, not in public. But when we crossed paths in the hall behind the chapel, he'd touch my shoulder lightly. It didn't feel like a gesture of comfort. More like a handler checking on his asset that each Sunday felt like a ritual choreographed with grief. People wept. Some held hands. Some just stared at the ceiling like it owed them an answer. But no one ever asked questions. Except him. Between sermons, he'd ask if I was sleeping, if I still dreamt in English, if I remembered the names of the men I left behind. I'd answer with half-truths enough to keep him engaged, never enough to risk exposure. "You lie with ease," he said once. After I told him I had no regrets, I replied, "That's what you like about me, isn't it?" He didn't smile that time. The truth was, the lie was starting to settle into my bones. I caught myself kneeling at the altar once, long after the chapel had emptied, just to see how it felt. Cold stone, the scent of wax and mildew, and something else, something I couldn't name. Not faith, maybe fatigue, or longing. Not for God, but for a place where no one asked you who you were working for. I gave him breadcrumbs. Details from old ops, scrub it of dates and places. Just enough to sound confessional, and he responded with verses. Each one chosen carefully. Each one delivered like a mirror. But the mirror cracked one afternoon when a child entered the chapel with a note. She handed it to him, then stood by the altar as he read it. His face didn't move, but his right hand closed slowly into a fist. That evening, he asked me about a name I'd never mentioned. Kurtz. I froze. He noticed. Slip of the tongue, he said. Someone else mentioned it in prayer, but no one there prayed out loud, not for names, not for ghosts. I left early that day, but not before seeing him take the child's note and burn it in the candle flame, eyes closed, as if reciting a secret he no longer wanted to remember. Weeks passed. I kept up the act, returned every Sunday, every Thursday, sat in silence, shared half-truths, confessed things I barely remembered, until the line between cover and self began to dissolve. Then, one night, I dreamt in German. That was the night I realized the lie wasn't just for them anymore. I first noticed the humming on a Thursday. It was faint, almost masked by the pipes, but it had rhythm. Not mechanical, electrical, the kind of frequency that doesn't come from prayer or plumbing. It came every time he entered the confessional, just before speaking, just after pulling that small lever behind his seat. I thought it was part of the ventilation, until I realized there was no ventilation. The door behind the altar had always been off limits, said to be storage. Old hymnals, linens, nothing worth checking. But the lock was new. Too new for a place held together by rust and mercy. I began to time my visits, arriving early, leaving late, watching who entered that room. Only him. One morning, I brushed past the rear hallway as he spoke to a parishioner. The door wasn't fully closed. I glanced in. Shelves, yes, but the walls were thicker, reinforced. Soundproofing, maybe? Or insulation. But for what? I pretended not to see. Week later, after another confession, I lingered, listened. When he left, I checked the booth. The lever was real small, metallic, inset into the side panel. Smooth with use, worn like it had purpose. That night, I came back with wire, picked the lock in 37 seconds. Slower than usual. My hand wasn't shaking, but it felt like it should have been. Inside was no storage room, It was a recording chamber, 3 reels, labeled in neat, almost obsessive handwriting. Eric, 11/12. Hild, 01/03. Unknown male Thomas? I froze at that one. Dozens more lined the walls, organized by date. No security just. Meticulous order. A desk, a typewriter, a stack of transcripts clipped together. I scanned them fast. Confessions, doubts, names, some redacted, others underlined. The pastor hadn't been listening. He'd been collecting. The confessional wasn't symbolic. It was tactical. I didn't steal anything. I didn't have to. Just seeing it was enough. The next time I sat across from him, I waited. Let the silence stretch. He didn't pull the lever. Instead, he said, "You've been busy." I answered with a shrug. "You're not the only one taking notes." He looked tired for the first time. Not surprised. Not angry. Just old. "You think this changes anything?" he asked. "I think it confirms everything." He nodded, like I'd passed a test. Or failed one. Then he reached into his coat and placed a small tin box on the table between us. Inside, a reel, unlabeled. "For when you're ready to hear yourself," he said. I left it there. Didn't touch it. I was ready for answers. But not that answer. It was a test. I knew it the moment I said the name. "Dresd," I whispered inside the booth. Just that. One word. No details. No context. A ghost from an old mission, the kind that shouldn't have followed me here. I wanted to see if it echoed. If the walls had ears beyond the tape reels. The next morning, the answer arrived. 3 agents in Dresden were arrested at separate locations. Simultaneous, clean, precise. No warning. No survivors. I waited for confirmation. It came through Langley 3 days later. Compromise suspected. Leak confirmed. Only 3 people knew about that op. 2 were dead. The 3rd was staring at me across the altar, quoting Corinthians. He never flinched, never blinked, never broke rhythm. I kept going. Attended services. Said the right things. But something had changed. My confessions became traps. Each one baited with a different fragment of truth. Cities, Cody names, dates with 1 number wrong. I watched what happened after each. Patterns emerged. Arrests, disappearances, not always immediate, but consistent. Delayed echoes of every whisper I let slip. He was funneling intel. And the confessional was the pipeline. But the precision, it wasn't just hearsay. Someone was cross-referencing, verifying, meaning he wasn't acting alone. There was structure behind him. Command, protocol, probably grew. Maybe not. The way he responded to certain phrases told me everything. When I mentioned Budapest, he blinked. When I brought up the Vienna drop in '58, he paused for half a breath. But when I said, "Perimeter C," he smiled. That smile was the first time I saw the weapon he really was. Not bullets, not blades, just trust, dismantled one conversation at a time. I confronted Langley, indirectly, through a coded debrief. I left breadcrumbs, asked if we had someone running counter-op under ecclesiastical cover. The reply came 3 days later. 2 words, "Stay close." They knew and let him operate. That's when it clicked. The chapel wasn't just a leak. It was a trap we'd agreed to live with. Sacrifices weighed. Information exchanged. A deal struck in shadows. I wasn't invited to see. I started dreaming of pews. Being unable to stand. Of whispering names I didn't recognize. One morning, I watched the service from outside, through the stained glass. He stood at the front, hands folded, head bowed. The congregation prayed. I counted 9 regulars. 1 missing. That night, I returned to the back room. My reel was gone. In its place, A note. Trust is the first confession. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't sleep the next either, because I wasn't sure anymore who I was working for, or if I'd ever known. I'd stopped using my real name long before Berlin. Even in Langley, they preferred aliases. Cleaner, easier to erase. But that morning, during an empty service with only 3 of us in attendance, he said it. No Temes. Thomas Eli Franklin. It came out smooth, intentional, as if he'd been rehearsing it. I didn't react right away. My body froze, but my face stayed still. Years of training held the tremor back. My hands stayed folded. My breath didn't catch. Only my thoughts raced, and even they slowed in self-defense. I hadn't used all. 3 names together since recruitment. Not even during internal briefings. Only 2 people alive had access to the full file, and neither was in East Berlin. The air shifted, heavy, static in the silence. He went on speaking, calm, like it was part of the sermon. The other 2 attendees didn't even lift their heads. Either they hadn't heard, or they already knew. When the service ended, I remained seated. He passed by, as he always did, and placed a hand on my shoulder. This time, he squeezed not hard, but firm, familiar, possessive. I didn't move. Later that day, I paced outside the chapel. I watched the shadows move across the facade, measured the time it took for guards to pass, watched the same man sweep the same steps. Everything seemed unchanged, but nothing was. I replayed it in my head, the tone, the cadence. He hadn't asked if it was my name. He'd stated it, and he'd smiled, not warmly, almost sympathetically, like he was doing me a favor. I met him that evening behind the chapel, near the boiler. No one else around. I didn't speak at first. How long have you known? I finally asked. Since before you entered, he said. How? I asked. To who? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was me crossing a street in Prague, 2 years prior. Same coat, same gait, same face I thought I'd buried under new names. I didn't take the photo. I just looked at it. Why now? I asked. Because you're not hiding anymore, he said. I walked away without a word, but my pulse didn't settle for hours. That night, I disassembled my transmitter, burned old notes, reviewed everything I'd said in that confessional, every slip, every silence, every breath. It wasn't just that he knew my name. It was that he wanted me to know. He knew, and he wasn't afraid of what I'd do about it. I didn't sleep the night before, didn't shave, didn't carry my usual backup piece. Just a worn lighter and a pocket knife I hadn't touched since Bucharest. I walked to the chapel like I was going to mass, calm, focused, every step a countdown. He was already there, sitting in the second row, coat still buttoned, hands folded over his knees. Not praying, just waiting, like he'd known I'd come, and was giving me the courtesy of going first. I sat beside him, not across, not behind, beside, close enough to feel the heat from his coat, close enough to smell the faint trace of tobacco and old ash. I know, I said. I figured, he answered. No pretense, no denial. Just 2 tired men sitting in a chapel where no one was innocent anymore. Why? I asked. He didn't flinch. Reached into his coat slowly, too slow to be a threat, and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, Soviet, red-striped. He held it open to me like a peace offering. I took one. I don't smoke. We both did things we didn't believe in, he said. But belief wasn't the point, was it? I lit mine anyway. The first drag burned. I let it. You're grew, I said. I was, he replied. Once, long ago. Before. They stopped pretending we mattered. So this is what now? A personal crusade? He looked at the altar, not in reverence. More like someone checking an empty mailbox. No, this is just ... Silence, organized. That stuck with me. Silence, organized. Like grief filed by date and category. I was told to watch, he said. Then to record, then to persuade. Eventually, I stopped needing the orders. And me? You were different. You weren't here to collect. You were here to leave something behind. That part hurt, because it was true. I'd come to bury more than observe. To dissolve what was left of Thomas Eli Franklin. You ever believe in anything? I asked. He looked at the crucifix for the first time since I'd met him. I believe that war ends, he said. It doesn't. We sat in silence. The chapel creaked around us. Somewhere, water dripped. No prayers. No sermon. I have orders to end this, I said. I know, he replied. I expected more noise. I stood, dropped the half-smoked cigarette on the stone floor dot, but before I walked away, he said one last thing. The enemy isn't the man across the border. It's the man inside your file. I didn't ask what that meant. I was too afraid he was right. The door gave way without resistance that night. Lock filed down weeks ago. I'd studied the hinge, measured the rhythm of patrols, memorized the creaks of each floorboard between the rear hall and that forbiddance room. It was finally time dot inside. It was colder than expected. No insulation. Just brick, wires, dust, and a hum that never fully stopped. The room smelled of paper and steel. And something else, like a place where secrets had been sweating for years. A desk faced the wall, not the door. Intentional. On it, 2 reel-to-reel machines, 1 mid-record. Headphones. Dials. Volume control scuffed with use. Someone had been adjusting the gain manually. Not passive recording. Supervision. The shelves held tapes dozens, maybe hundreds. All labeled. Some by initials, some by dates, others simply by vague descriptions. Consulate wife, student, red scarf, Elias. I found one marked with my confession code. Not my name, but the sequence I'd repeated in the booth. It wasn't just espionage. It was curation. A catalog of vulnerability. I played 30 seconds of one tape. A woman sobbing. Mention of her husband's work in customs. No names, but details. Enough to extract pressure, blackmail. I stopped the reel. Moved. To the drawers. Found transcripts. Not verbatim. Edited. Translated. Cross-referenced. Some highlighted with red ink. Others annotated in German and Russian. Behind the shelves, I found a false wall-thin panel masking a second cache. Burned bags. Microfilm. Empty folders marked with the CIA seal. Originals, not copies. That was the twist. He hadn't just been collecting from locals. He'd been collecting from us. I found my own voice in one tape. Barely audible. Talking about an old route in Hamburg. Something I'd only mentioned once, in half sarcasm, during a confessional rant. He'd kept it. Outside, a footstep. I killed the light. Held my breath. Door opened a crack. Then a pause. Then, it closed again. I waited 2 full minutes before moving. Packed nothing. Touched nothing else. Left the door exactly as I found it. That night, I didn't return to safe house. I slept in an alley 2 blocks down, pistol in hand, coat over my face. Rats nearby. I didn't care. The chapel had become something else. Not just a trap, a node. A place where the war got distilled. Where every soul that dared whisper became part of an archive no one admitted existed. And I had just become part of it. Again. I stopped attending the services. Not out of fear by then. Fear had settled into something colder. Practical. I needed distance, but I couldn't stop watching. Every day, I observed from across the tram yard behind a boarded-up kiosk. I logged every visitor, timed their stays, matched them to voices on the tapes I'd heard. One morning, the pastor stood outside the chapel with a small black bird perched on his shoulder. A crow, maybe, or something darker. It didn't move, even when he did. He noticed me watching, didn't wave, just looked, dead on, like the crow had eyes too. I took it as a signal. Later that week, I broke into his study. A cleaner job this time. Tools wrapped in cloth, gloves, silence. Inside, I found what I wasn't supposed to. Not files, not recordings, not even blackmail, just notebooks. Dozens of them, each one filled with writing that didn't track cleanly. Philosophical meanderings, observations about behavior, diagrams of body posture, marginalia quoting Sun Tzu next to Corinthians. But in the margins of one, underlined twice, I found this. To know the soul is to control the body. I sat back. It wasn't just intelligence gathering, it was spiritual coercion, weaponized empathy, emotional entrapment. He wasn't leaking secrets for money or ideology. He was crafting patterns, profiling the weakness of belief. That day, I remembered something he said during a sermon weeks earlier. Everyone bends the knee to something. The trick is knowing what they think it is and what it actually is. He didn't serve Moscow. He didn't serve Washington. He served the architecture of control itself. That made him more dangerous than any handler I'd ever met. I found a map under one of the floorboards. Crude, hand-drawn. Chapels, mission houses, embassy cultural centers. Lines connected them. Dates scribbled along the routes. It wasn't a network of spies. It was a cartography of confession. And the cross? It wasn't a symbol of faith. It was a tool to anchor trust, so it could be disassembled slowly, piece by piece. That night, the crow was gone, but in its place, scratched into the wooden doors of the chapel, was a shape I hadn't seen before. Cross, but the arms were inverted. And from the base, a line extended downward sharp, straight, like a dagger. I drafted the report that same night, 12 pages, coded references, photos from the study, 3 audio clips. I sealed it, marked it priority, and sent it through the courier chain. Langley wouldn't ignore it. They couldn't. This was beyond protocol violation. It was infrastructure subversion, covert exploitation of emotional intelligence under religious immunity. I expected orders to pull him. What I got was silence. 3 days passed. Then the reply came, cease operations, do not interfere. Asset active, value high. That was it. No explanation, no denials, just cold classification. He was theirs, or someone's, maybe always had been. Maybe this chapel wasn't rogue, it was sanctioned. A program within a program, hidden behind robes and incense. I tried to reach my secondary contact. Channel closed, then the tertiary. Radio silence. I was being iced out. By my own side. I ran a final counter-operation off book. Monitored known contact points linked to the pastor's visitors. Followed one woman to a bakery 3 blocks west. She passed a note to a man who didn't blink when I tailed him. That man led me to a Stasi facility we'd flagged months ago and walked in without hesitation. 2 days later, the woman vanished. I submitted an encrypted alert to Langley, requesting extraction or at minimum clarification. The reply? Do not jeopardize relationship with subject. Stand down. That's when I understood that it wasn't about which side he was on. It was about how useful he was to both. The perfect operative. Embedded in grief, disguised as comfort. Immune to scrutiny. Under the protection of faith. And me? I wasn't a spy anymore. I was a control variable monitored. Used, tolerated, just like him. I stopped wearing the wire, burned my notes, disengaged from internal drops, went dark even within the system, and then came the final confirmation. A package arrived, no name, just my dead drop marker. Inside, a typed transcript of one of my own confessions. Redacted, annotated, stamped with an internal clearance I'd never seen before. Wasn't the only one listening, and I wasn't the only one compromised. The last page had a handwritten note. You were never meant to believe, just to confess. He was gone before the sun came up. No goodbye, no final sermon. Just empty pews and a door left ajar. I arrived early, hoping to confront him, maybe even warn him. But there was nothing. No candles lit, no hymnals out of place. Just a silence too complete to be accidental. The congregation trickled in. Some looked confused. Others sat as if the absence were expected. No one asked questions. That's when I knew he hadn't fled. He'd been removed. I walked to the altar, slid my hand under the second bench, same spot I'd once found an old bulletin folded into a cipher. This time, there was only a scrap of paper. Latin, fiat voluntas tua. Thy will be done. 3 days later, a memo arrived through backchannel. One of our field agents had been executed in Bucharest. He'd gone dark, breached protocol. Leaked information traced to a confession recorded 6 months prior. I'd conducted under alias in this very chapel. I checked the internal log. The pastor had accessed that recording days before he vanished. I filed the final report, redacted most of it. The truth was no longer mine to tell. It belonged to whatever machine had deemed that man too valuable to lose, too dangerous to keep, and too woven into the system to erase cleanly. Still, part of me wanted to believe he'd escaped, that he'd slipped into another life, under another name, maybe lighting candles somewhere else, listening, recording, quietly, threading another web behind stained glass. But I doubt it. The church closed 2 weeks later. Condemned for structural damage, the pews were removed, the booth dismantled. But I saw it before they bricked up the door. A final etching carved into the back wall, just above where his head once rested during confession. He who knows your secrets owns your silence. I never set foot in another chapel after that. Couldn't. Not because I lost faith. I never had it. But because the sound of an organ made my body lock up. Even now, when I hear those deep, hollow notes echo through a recording or pass by a church during a funeral, I feel the weight of invisible eyes. The chapel is gone. Officially. Bulldozed. Replaced by a concrete lot no one parks in. But in my head, it's still there. Dust in the air. A flickering candle near the pulpit. The creak of the fourth pew on the left. His voice, low and certain, asking questions that felt like knives dulled by kindness. I thought I'd left it all behind, but last winter, I received a letter. No return address, just a page torn from a hymn book. Underlined verses. Margins annotated in the same hand I'd memorized a decade ago. One phrase circled in red. Blessed are the forgotten, for they cannot betray. I burned it. Didn't sleep for 3 nights. Sometimes I think I'm the only one who remembers. That all the others, the informants, the handlers, the watchers, they've either disappeared or convinced themselves it never happened. But I remember. I remember how it felt to speak a name in the dark and hear your own life unravel in response. He taught me to move forward, yes. But never warned me that moving forward would mean erasing myself. That's the cruelest part of it all. Not the betrayals, not the deaths, but how easily you become a ghost in your own story. They never asked for a report. Not about the chapel, not about the tapes, not about him. Maybe it was cleaner that way. No files, no records, no fallout. But when I sit alone in the kitchen with the lights off and the radio humming low, sometimes I see that back room again. Smell the iron and mildew. Feel the weight of knowing something too quiet to explain. I left East Berlin with all my teeth, most of my sanity, and a few names no longer in circulation. That's more than some. But not a night goes by that I don't wonder if someone, somewhere, still listens to my voice on a reel-to-reel. Paused right before the moment I stopped pretending. There's a silence that follows certain confessions, and I don't think I've ever broken it. If you made it this far, maybe you were meant to hear this. Subscribe if you want to know what else never made it to the files. And tell me in the comments, did you already know about any of this? Or did I just ruin your sleep?